This is our first story of the War of 1812, a strange war in which the United States and the British are again fighting each other. The Americans more for national pride, the British in some ways looking to recapture their colonies they lost 40 years earlier in the American Revolution. This first story is about Fort Detroit. Detroit is located in Michigan, and it's still in Michigan. Of course, it's a big city, a very powerful city in a lot of ways. At the time of the War of 1812, Detroit is a small fort where Americans are holding on to some territory. The British are not far away, and when in Canada, in a fort called Fort Malden. And when the war begins, the War of 1812 begins, the Americans would like to defend themselves and go take Fort Malden in Canada. So Fort Malden is not a threat to Fort Detroit in America. Now, this battle in this war takes place here at Fort Detroit in today's Michigan. You can even see a little bit of Fort Malden on the map here, a little bit south of Fort Detroit, where the British control. There are a number of tribes who fight with the British. Some of those tribes have a lot of complaints against the Americans and would like to see them damaged. General William Hull is the American commander. He was a great Revolutionary War general. He was a friend of Nathan Hale, who was the famous spy who was executed in New York City for spying against the British. In fact, General Hull is the one who made Nathan Hale's last words about having only one regret, that he only had one life to give to his country, famous. We're not sure if that story is true or tradition. At this point, you can see here General Hull is 60 years old. He's worn out, maybe a little afraid of what might happen. In fact, he's going to surrender Fort Detroit after a badly managed attempt to capture Fort Malden and will be sentenced to be executed by the American Army. His advantage here is that he is a friend of President Madison, and he'll be pardoned and not executed for his terrible job in the War of 1812. Here's a little of that story about the terrible job. The general that General Hull for the Americans is fighting against is Major General Sir Isaac Brock, the eighth son in his family, meaning he's not going to inherit any land in Europe, because in those days Europe was still, the oldest son would inherit everything from his father. The other sons have to go make their own career somewhere else. And so General Isaac Brock decided to make his career in the army. He was a large, good-looking man, seemed to have a lot of lady friends, but never married any of them. You'll find out that, of course, that he's going to die several months after this Battle of Detroit, maybe ending his life before he'd actually married. This is what an American soldier looked like at the time if you're in full military dress. This is what a British soldier would look like. We still have the red coats. We have the formal uniforms that really aren't very comfortable to fight in, but they're supposed to look good on parade. One of the Native American leaders who is very important to this story is Tecumseh. Tecumseh and his brother, the Prophet, are fighting with the British against the Americans. But the story is that General William Hull is supposed to launch an attack on Fort Malden, led by Sir Isaac Brock. And when General Hull gets his forces near Fort Malden, he decides he doesn't want to attack. He may not have enough supplies. He may not be able to get back to his own fort with his troops. He decides to stop. And he waits for a little while and finally decides to go back to his own fort at Fort Detroit. When he gets there, he finds the British have captured his fort in his absence. So General Hull has lost his own fort, never even fought a battle at the place he was supposed to, has to surrender his army, and it's very embarrassing defeat. In fact, people say General Hull did such a bad job, he had to have done this on purpose. You can't be that bad on accident. And so that's why General Hull is arrested by the American Army, sentenced for treason for giving up his own fort, and sentenced to be executed. Well, as we saw earlier, President Madison pardons General Hull. He won't be executed. This is a picture of the skyline of today's Detroit, and that will end our story of Fort Detroit and an embarrassing military defeat for the United States.